In AD 363, the most brilliant emperor Rome had produced in generations made a decision no sane general would ever make. He ordered his own fleet to be burned. More than 1,000 ships, all the food, all the equipment, every route of escape. The flames lit up the night sky along the banks of the Tigris as 65,000 soldiers stood in silence, realizing they had just watched their only chance of returning home turn to ashes by the command of the very man they had sworn to follow to the death. No enemy had done this to them. It was their own emperor. Julian was not fighting the Sassanid Persian Empire. He was fighting the ghost of Alexander the Great inside his own mind, and that seemingly small distinction shaped every decision he made throughout the campaign. This is a story that history books summarize in 2 paragraphs, but it deserves far more than that, because you're going to recognize Julian in places you never expected. And if you enjoy this kind of content, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's coming next. Now sit back because this story is about to begin. In the 4th century AD, the known world was divided between 2 giants with radically different ways of waging war. Rome, heavy infantry, unmatched engineering, and a logistical system capable of moving entire armies with astonishing precision. The Sassanid Empire, heavily armored cavalry that made the ground shake. The Clinabarii, the closest thing to tanks in the ancient world, and mounted archers who could turn any open field into a storm of arrows. Rome relied on structure. Persia specialized in destroying that very structure, retreating, emptying the land, cutting off supplies, and striking when the enemy was exhausted and starving. 2 empires equal in power, sustained by a fragile balance that had lasted for generations. What shattered that balance wasn't a new weapon or a larger army. It was a man driven by an obsession that went far beyond defending borders. A ruler had risen to the throne who didn't just want to defeat Persia, he wanted to use it as a stage to become a legend. Julian was not the kind of emperor Rome was used to. He was a philosopher, an intellectual, a devoted follower of Neoplatonism, and one of the last emperors to openly reject Christianity. But what truly defined him was an almost pathological obsession with Alexander the Great. It wasn't admiration, it was deep identification. He studied Alexander, imitated him, dreamed of surpassing him, and that mindset shaped real military decisions, leading to mistakes that a purely rational general would never have made. The problem wasn't a lack of intelligence or courage. He had both in abundance. The problem was that he tried to embody 3 roles in one mind: strategic general, political emperor, and epic hero destined for immortality. And it was under the weight of those conflicting identities that Julian planned the largest military campaign of the century. Julian did not improvise. He planned an operation on an impressive scale. 65,000 soldiers, over 1,000 ships, and hundreds of tons of supplies. The key innovation was using the Euphrates River as the backbone of his logistics. While the army advanced along its banks, the fleet carried food, weapons, and siege equipment, moving in parallel with every step. This eliminated dependence on enemy territory and protected supply lines from ambushes, the 2 greatest threats to any invasion. The campaign began with remarkable efficiency. The Persians retreated, and a sense of imminent victory filled the air. And it was precisely at that moment of confidence, almost euphoria, that Julian made his first critical mistake. Never divide your forces against an enemy you haven't yet defeated. This principle has echoed through centuries of military strategy. Julian knew it, and yet he still sent a significant portion of his army toward Armenia, hoping to create a second front. On paper, it was a seductive idea. In reality, it was a silent disaster. Without fast communication, coordinating 2 separated armies was almost impossible. Any delay on one side left the other completely exposed. The reinforcements from Armenia never arrived. The main army was left isolated, pushing deeper and deeper into enemy territory while the invisible Persian encirclement slowly tightened around them. Never cross a river under enemy attack, another fundamental rule of warfare. Julian knew this too, and still ordered the crossing of the Tigris with the Persian army positioned and waiting on the opposite bank. The ships advanced under a storm of projectiles. Soldiers fell into the waters before reaching the far side, and those who made it ashore had to climb a steep embankment carrying heavy equipment against enemies holding every positional advantage. The Roman response was to adapt the testudo, the shield tortoise formation, for a situation it was never designed for, creating a moving wall of metal that advanced inch by inch uphill. And it worked. Julian won the crossing. But it was precisely this victory that doomed him, because it reinforced his belief that he was destined for greatness, with Ctesiphon finally within reach. Ctesiphon was colossal, heavily fortified, and stocked to withstand a siege long enough to break any invading force through sheer time. Julian's problem was brutally simple. A siege requires time, time requires food, food requires supplies, and supplies require secure routes. He had none of these in sufficient quantity. He had advanced too fast, too deep, with supply lines stretched to their absolute limit. The Persians didn't need to act, they only needed to wait. It was the favored strategy of Shapur II, refined over generations. And it was in this tense stalemate, with his objective so close yet completely out of reach, that Julian made the decision that would seal the fate of the entire campaign. Julian's order to burn the fleet on the Tigris stands as one of the most disturbing moments in military history. More than 1,000 vessels, supplies, food, and equipment, and the only route of escape were handed over to the flames by the emperor himself. The reasons are still debated today: to prevent capture by the Persians, to turn sailors into soldiers, or to eliminate any possibility of retreat and force the army to fight with no alternative. Whatever the reason, the effect was the same. 65,000 men simultaneously lost their supply line, their mobility, and their way out. It was like a climber cutting his safety rope halfway up the ascent. The act may seem bold, but it turns any future mistake into a fall with no return. Julian had locked the trap from the inside. What followed was not a strategic retreat, it was a slow agony. Soldiers marched on empty stomachs under relentless heat, constantly watching their flanks as Persian forces appeared and vanished like shadows. Shapur II didn't need a decisive battle, he simply maintained constant pressure, destroyed any attempt to forage, and let hunger do the work. Then came the final blow. During a skirmish, Julian was struck by a spear. The wound was fatal. The philosopher-emperor who dreamed of surpassing Alexander did not die in a grand, decisive battle, but in a chaotic clash during a desperate retreat. The new emperor, Julian, was forced to negotiate a humiliating peace with Shapur II, returning territories Rome had conquered with blood for decades. The campaign that began with the ambition to surpass Alexander ended with Rome retreating and 65,000 men paying the price for an obsession that was never truly theirs. 2,000 years separate you from Julian, and yet, if you were honest with yourself throughout this video, you probably recognized something familiar in him. Not the emperor, not the general, but the man who knew the rules, understood the risks, and still chose to bet everything on a grand gesture because the narrative he had built about himself mattered more than the reality in front of him. That isn't a weakness unique to Roman emperors, it's the most sophisticated trap human ambition can fall into. So here's the question that remains, and one worth answering in the comments. Where do you see Julian's pattern in your own life? Where have you moved too fast without the structure needed to sustain what you were building? Because this campaign didn't end in AD 363. It repeats every day in careers, businesses, and projects led by people with more talent than structure. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. The stories coming next are on the same level as this one. Empires that collapsed from within, generals who changed the world with a single decision, battles that shaped the fate of entire civilizations. And if you made it this far, leave a like. It really helps the channel grow. See you in the next